Drive Live Formula One.
Welcome to live coverage of the Spanish Grand Prix weekend ahead of the 7th race of the season. Coming up today, 2 free practice sessions, and guiding you through all the coverage is myself, Harry Benjamin. Former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley is alongside me, as well as the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson. The grandstands are filling up. It's dry at the moment, but the threat of rain is looming across the weekend. 30% chance for this session, FP1. Mark, lots of stories going into this weekend. Shall we start with the circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, where we're at? A new layout, well, an old layout that's been brought back.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. It's going to be fascinating to see how it affects everybody over the course of the weekend. Essentially, what's happened is that, I don't know, some people might say an annoying little chicane at the end of the final sector of the lap, as it used to be, has been removed, and that's been replaced with what was the old layout that we last used in 2006. 2 fast, sweeping right-hand turns that then lead on to the start-finish straight. It's going to make the lap time considerably quicker. It should, in theory at least, aid overtaking along that main straight past the grandstands and into turn 1 as everybody comes out the final corner a lot closer and on the throttle. But it's also going to improve or increase things like tyre deg. The left-hand tyres always suffer around this circuit. It's quite an abrasive tarmac around here, and with an extra set of high-speed corners, long duration as well, that's going to really hamper people. Yeah, tyre degradation around here is an ever-increasing factor. In fact, FP1 and FP2 is going to see some new Pirelli rubber being tested as well. Revised construction of the hard compound tyre. 2 sets of hard tyres being given out to the drivers. The idea is Pirelli is working on making a structure that is more resistant to fatigue ahead of 2024, Andrew. So we're going to see a lot, hopefully, a lot of running out there. Of course, Pirelli are doing the test with a couple of Mercedes in particular post-Spain as well. So this is going to be a enthralling session of tyre testing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the new layout or old layout is it's going to be it's what the effect it's going to have of this weekend is really quite an unknown. So in Monaco last weekend, Lewis Hamilton was saying, "Are they going to be easy flat, those corners?" Yesterday, Charles Leclerc was going, "Don't know whether they're going to be flat or not," particularly the last one. The first left-hander is a bit more open than the second one. It's so that may well be flat. Also, they're still accelerating after what's it called now? That corner, turn 12, the long sort of 180-degree corner. They'll still be accelerating through the next corner, I think, through there. But then the next corner, because it's downhill on the entry, whether it's flat or not is going to be really could be key. And according to Charles Leclerc yesterday, he was saying that could have an effect on overtaking as well. Because if it's easy flat, then that's going to be less bad for the tyres. Whereas if it's not easy flat, then as Mark was saying earlier, this tyre scrub's going to be a lot worse, and it's going to make the left front, the degradation there and the overheating there much worse. So that's going to have an effect on how they can handle the race. And I've heard mixed reports about whether it's going to help overtaking or not. People, when the chicane was introduced in 2007, the idea behind that was to help overtaking. It didn't work, and it always looked like a terribly clunky, ugly corner, and the drivers are all pleased it's gone as Fernando Alonso starts to move down to the end of the pit lane to go out, to the delight of his home fans, no doubt. And now people are saying we've put the fast corners back in, that might help overtaking. Well, of course, the cars are different, so it's going to be a big test for this new generation of cars as well.
It certainly will be. Well, I'm sure plenty of tyre chat to come throughout this session, enthralling as it is. On the overtaking subject, 75 overtakes here at this track last year. Only 43 of them were actually done on the track. So particularly as well with the hard, the medium, the soft available this weekend, pit stop strategy might be a factor too. As we get some movement in the pit lane, we saw Fernando Alonso making his way down to get ready to head out. About 30 seconds until we get the green light. This is how the championship stands at the moment after another win in Monaco. It is Max Verstappen with a 39-point lead, 144 to his name. Then it's Sergio Perez with 105, Fernando Fernando Alonso in third, just 12 points between him and the Mexican Red Bull driver. Could he try and find a way to split the Red Bulls later this season? Perhaps. Then it's Hamilton, Russell who round out the top 5. Carlos Sainz Jr., Charles Leclerc, Lance Stroll, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, the top 10 in the drivers' standings. Red Bull lead the way, a whopping 129-point gap they have at the top to Aston Martin in second. Then it's just 2 points between Aston Martin and Mercedes. Then the field starts to tighten up as we go down. Ferrari in fourth, Alpine rounding out the top 5. Then it's McLaren, Haas, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams. All the teams with points on the board at the moment, but session is underway. Green flag, and it is the home hero, Fernando Alonso, in the green Aston Martin, who makes his way out first. And for those who want to sync up, I'll do that for you now. It's 59 minutes and 28, 27, 26 on the clock. Now, Mark, Fernando Alonso, he's got these great big, what's the actual technical term for
Well,
them?
we call them aero rakes, but they look like huge scaffold constructions, don't they, on the side of the car. All there to collect valuable data, of course. It's measuring airflow at different points around the tyre, particularly on Fernando's car, around the front tyres. This circuit is all about this session rather, all about collecting data. The teams and drivers have run 1 million miles around this track over the years. It's always traditionally been used, although not this year, but traditionally been used as a pre-season testing venue. So everyone's got data to compare things to. So when you can measure using these great big aero rakes that you can only put on in practice, of course, it gives you that data that you can then compare to all the stuff you got previously, and you know whether front wing upgrades, brake ducts, things like that are really giving you the advantage that you hope they would.
Well, he is first out on track is Alonso, and he's coming up to the new final corner, the long right-hander, which cuts out the old chicane and brings you right back round onto the main straight. So 14 turns around this 4.6 kilometre, 2.8 mile track. Now, lots of questions after Monaco about Fernando Alonso, about Aston Martin. Did they throw away a win? Why did they not put on the intermediate tyre sooner? Why did they go for another set of slicks? Alonso isn't having any of it. He's not really accepting any kind of we did something wrong. Andrew, do you think they lost the win there?
Well, Alonso, to be fair to him, he did acknowledge yesterday that had they put on Inters at that time, maybe they could have won. And if you look at the numbers, I did a piece on this on the BBC Sport website a couple of days ago. I'm a bit ashamed of myself that I didn't do with the numbers as effectively on Sunday as I did on Tuesday. But anyway, not my greatest hour, perhaps. Anyway, it does look like if he'd come in on when he came in on lap 54, if he put on the intermediates instead of the slicks, he would have gained enough time over the next 2 laps, and Verstappen would have lost enough time over the next 2 laps for Alonso to be quite comfortably ahead at the end of the lap 56, I think it was. So when Verstappen came out of the pits, effectively, is the key point. Now, there's a lot of ifs and buts there, but what you do there to get that data is you look at what Hamilton and Ocon did, for example, when they did put Inters on, and kind of like cross-reference their gain to Alonso, and it would have put Alonso ahead. But in Aston Martin's defence, what we've got to remember is that the conditions were changing so quickly at that time. And on lap 54, Verstappen, who'd been waiting for rain, that's why he did a double-length stint on the medium tyres, did not come in. Now, Alonso was 13 seconds behind Verstappen when he started that lap. He'd closed on him by 5 seconds in the course of that lap because it was starting to get wet. It was wet around the sort of Casino Square, Mirabeau area. But then it was dry again after the tunnel. So, and Alonso, when he decided to come in, and he felt the track wasn't wet enough in its entirety to put Inters on. So they went for slicks. And the problem was the rain was moving in all the time, and in the time it basically took him to get out of the pits and up the hill into Casino again, it was obvious to him, oh no, we should have put the Inters on, that would have been the right choice. So he came around and put the Inters on again. Now, you can argue that given that he had time for 2 stops, which is why they made the decision to put the slicks on in the first place, because they knew they could come in on the next lap for Inters if they wanted to, without losing second place. You could argue, well, the way to gain was to put the Inters on. And if you aren't going to lose, because you can come in on the next lap, then you can come in for slicks if that's not the right decision. They would argue, well, you have to choose the tyre for the conditions at the time, and the conditions at the time were dry, according to them. And it's easy to criticise and say Hamilton and Ocon, for example, and Russell, who were behind him, did put on inters on that lap, but they were 30 seconds back, and the conditions had changed a lot in that time. However, I think that one of the clinches for me is, you know, why pit at all? If you think it's dry, why not wait a lap? That's the big question. But Alonso's key line, I think, yesterday was F1's easy from the sofa, you know, and the people don't get enough praise for the right decisions they make in difficult circumstances. He did allow that perhaps in hindsight this wasn't the right decision. You can delve into it, as I've just done for a couple of minutes, over and over and over again, but it is what it is. And anyway,
and he's right, by the way, it is easy from the sofa.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly difficult when you're there in that pressurised zone, particularly as things were changing as quickly as they were. So I think you've got to take that one. They gave themselves a position in which they could gamble because they had such a gap behind. They did exactly that. It didn't work out on that occasion, but hindsight's a wonderful thing.
I think one point that's worth making in this is that they were only in that position because Fernando Alonso is doing such an unbelievably good job in that car. No one else was anywhere near Max Verstappen in that race. He was the only one who kept vaguely in touch with him, and he, in an Aston Martin, kept one of the most dominant cars in history in sight for 50 plus laps. And I don't think it's right in a way for him to point out that it's Formula One mentality to criticise people when they get things wrong. And he said, you know, if it had been the other way around, we wouldn't have got praised. Actually, Red Bull would have got criticised for not stopping on that lap as well. But you know, he's kind of put him, almost by being brilliant, he's put himself in a position for the team to be criticised, which is a little bit unfortunate in a way.
Well, it could be queried and questioned time and time again, but they've moved on and they've come to Fernando Alonso's home race. And the stat that's going around at the moment is that this race is number 1,086 in Formula One history, and technically that means if Fernando Alonso starts the race, he would have taken a part in a third of all F1 races. That's the stat that's going around.
Stat yesterday. I'm sure that can't be right, because the 1000th Grand Prix was ages ago.
Yeah, but was it technically the 1000th though? Because sometimes they did it in MotoGP recently, where the 1000th Grand Prix wasn't really the 1000th Grand Prix.
It was the Chinese Grand Prix several years ago. Yeah. That's true. There's been a lot more than 86 Grand Prix since then, I'm sure.
That's the stat. Well, it sounds good either way. We've had a few minutes go by, and lap times are coming in. A lot of people on this new hard test tyre that Pirelli have asked the teams to run in FP1 and FP2. The fastest lap time at the moment, you'll be shocked to hear, is Max Verstappen with a 1:16.583 on that testing tyre. Then it's Sergio Perez, Yuki Tsunoda, Esteban Ocon, Pierre Gasly, the top five. The only people out there at the moment that are not on the test tyre are Lewis Hamilton, who's on the medium, Nico Hulkenberg is on the soft, George Russell and Alexander Albon are both on the medium compound tyre, as are Piastri and Lando Norris. The sound you're hearing right now is George Russell coming around the final corner.
Bit of bouncing off the entry of that last corner.
So, George Russell, with the return of the bouncing Mercedes, let's hope that doesn't become a bigger problem. Just a quick note on these tyres, these testing tyres, they're unmarked tyres that people are running, that teams have got 2 sets of them each, which they are using in FP1, mainly to collect data for Pirelli. It's a bit of an annoyance for the teams. Yes, of course, they gain some data, but the point behind it is that these are tyres that are going to be introduced to everybody from the British Grand Prix. So, Pirelli need to get that data to understand exactly how they perform. The teams would, of course, benefit from that, but it's also taking away from this valuable track time to get a real grip on the new upgrades on cars and the changes to the circuit.
Absolutely, as Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari out on track at the moment, just getting a little bit of a snap as he comes through turn 12 into 13 and now back around the final corner and onto the main straight for the Monegasque racer, who of course was leading this race for so long last year before his Ferrari conked out. Redemption day, maybe this time around, but it's hard to put any money on anybody different that isn't a Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez 1-2 come in the day. Fernando Alonso saying that at the start of the weekend. Hashtag BBC F1 if you want to get in touch. Any questions or queries, we shall do our best. Time right now for those sinking 50 minutes and 37 35 minutes on the clock. The sound you're currently listening to is on board with Charles Leclerc and Mark Ferrari. All eyes on them. Imola, a few weeks ago now, was cancelled, as we all know. That was going to be the first introduction of big upgrades, particularly for Ferrari. This is now the scene here in Barcelona where they are bringing these upgrades, and there's a lot of talk around these new side pods that they've got, a bit Red Bull inspired by Ferrari here.
Yeah, a really big, significant change, by far the biggest that they've seen so far this season on the red cars, and it is a little bit like the Red Bull, a little bit like the Aston Martin to some extent as well, so completely different shaping of the side pods. And what happens is, typically when you get a big change in regulation like we had last year, it takes a couple of seasons and eventually everybody starts to converge on similar designs. And of course the Red Bull, which was then copied by Aston Martin, is the class leading design from an aerodynamic perspective, and so people are starting to move that way. For Ferrari, though, they need this to work, because no matter which way you look at it, it's been a disappointing start to the season. Red Bull, of course, you've got to give maximum credit to, because they've absolutely smashed it. But Ferrari, you would have hoped, or they certainly would have hoped, to have been a lot closer and not really even been in the mix consistently, particularly on race day. And so that's what they're hoping this new upgrade is going to give them, a more drivable car that can look after its tyres over the course of a long race. And here at a circuit we've already talked about, very difficult in terms of tyre degradation, that upgrade, they need it to work. So this session and the one later on this afternoon going to be a really interesting time for them.
Yeah, Ferrari have been talking about this at the start of this weekend. They're describing it as a small upgrade to Ferrari drivers, but a move in the right direction. Their issue is inconsistency in the race. They can get the car in the right window, they call it, so setup basically, for one qualifying lap when they know the conditions. But the minute the conditions start changing, or they're on a run of laps, and conditions can mean anything from wind to track temperature to tyre condition and so on and so forth. The minute they go on any kind of long run, they really struggle with inconsistent behaviour, even sometimes within the same corner, certainly from one corner to another. And they're hoping that this is the first of a series of updates that's going to address that issue. By the way, just to go back to that stat, I've been doing a quick bit of numbers. The 1000th Grand Prix was the Chinese Grand Prix of 2019.
Right.
And actually, this is the 76th race since then, so you were right, I think.
I was right.
Laura Winter was right, actually.
Yes, Laura Winter was right. Credit where credit's due. Fantastic. Oh, that's really made my day. 48 minutes into this session left. We can call it quits there. But Max Verstappen is certainly not calling it quits. He is the sound you're listening to right now as he comes through the right hand of turn 12, but has a little bit of a soft one, a couple of goes on the steering wheel trying to get it into that right hander, and then the long turn 14 really puts the pressure on the front left tyre especially, but he's out onto the main straight now, and he goes fastest with a 1:15.945, about half a second the gap between him and Sergio Perez.
Interestingly, he looked like he was flat through that final corner, which I guess in the Red Bull you've got the best chance to do that, but he didn't lift as he came through the final part of that lap and onto the start-finish straight. His lap time currently 1:15.9. Simulations, although it's slightly speculative at the moment because this is the first time we've actually had a car on this new format with these current cars, speculation that lap times in qualifying could be down in the 12s. That's a huge chunk of time from where we are now at 15.9, so let's keep an eye on that.
I think we can safely say, Mark, I know it's a Red Bull, but if Verstappen's able to go flat through that last corner after 13 minutes of P1 with a substantial fuel load on it and hard test tyres, I think we're pretty safe to say that most of the grid will be going through it flat, in qualifying at least, perhaps not in the race, but certainly in qualifying.
Yeah, to compare, and you can't really, because the last time we had the turn 14, the long right-hander, was back in 2006. Completely different cars, but the Q3 lap time was a 1:14.6. So a little idea of the increase in pace that we're certainly going to see around this track. Now, it may be slightly ominous for the rest of this year about Max Verstappen and Red Bull, but did Alpine give us a little bit of hope? Not obviously really for a championship challenge, but perhaps another team to get involved in that battle for certainly second, third in the constructors. Esteban Ocon getting on to the podium. We've just seen him in the Alpine coming across the line now. He's currently fifth fastest, just in front of his teammate Pierre Gasly, who's in the pit lane right now. But off the back of some strong comments from CEO Laurent Rossi, giving them a bit of a kick to get this season started. I mean, they certainly responded.
Well, they did respond. Take nothing away from them, and particularly Esteban Ocon. It was a great result in Monaco, but it is a very specific circuit, and what you really need in Monaco is, you need the driver to be absolutely in the zone and in that groove all the way through the weekend, and he certainly had that. But operationally, the team needs to be at its best, particularly at a race where we've got such changeable conditions as we had last Sunday. So they got everything right, but it is, in terms of outright performance, a very specific circuit. I don't expect that form to necessarily continue, and I'm not even convinced it was definitely a response to the criticisms that came from the CEO. I wonder if he might see it that way. He might think, well, look, it worked. I criticised everybody and we got that great result, but I'm not sure it's quite that similar.
Bear in mind that Pierre Gasly qualified 5th in Miami as well. So yeah. Alpine's view is that they've got a quick, this is not, they're not saying this on the record, but from people I'm talking to in the team, their view is that they've got a quick car. They've just made a bit of a Horlicks of the season so far in a number of situations. And they think if they can sort of get themselves sorted out and run it more consistently. Here's Perez's radio.
I'm starting to bounce as I go into the final corner.
Yeah, Perez bouncing, and interestingly, he definitely wasn't flat through that final corner because the car was bouncing around so much. So a big difference between the two Red Bulls at the moment.
Yeah, that bouncing is interesting, isn't it? That's 2 cars doing it now. So remember that the rules were changed over the winter. The floor edges were raised in an attempt to try to stop that happening. And it's not really been a topic of conversation so far this year, but it does seem to be back today. So you just go back to that point I was trying to make about Alpine. I think we need a run of races to see where they are consistently. I think one of the downsides they've had this year, okay, operationally they've not been great. There've been some reliability issues as well. Some of that was things like hoses coming off, like with the fire in Baku first practice. They had a really terrible weekend in Baku, which I think is what prompted Laurent Rossi's remarks, which I think most people in the paddock think was perhaps not the way a CEO would motivate a team effectively, but he might not agree with that, of course. They think they've got a quick car, but we need a run of events to see that thing. And where they're losing out, I think, just to go back to Fernando Alonso, and I've heard this from inside the team as well, with Alonso, you know where you are. Mark will know this too, from working with him at McLaren. He goes out, he does the lap time, that's the lap time. He's not inconsistent in any way. He's not up one weekend, down another weekend. He's not up one day, down another day. It doesn't take him a long time to get up to speed. Think about what happened with Ocon and Alonso last year when they were teammates. Ocon would often start the weekend half a second behind Alonso and then get up to his level by qualifying. With Gasly and Ocon, they don't have a driver like that anymore. So I think that's probably not helping them either. So we need a bit of time to let that car play its way into the season before we can finally judge it. But it does, I think there is evidence that it's pretty quick.
Yeah, well, with that podium, Alpine now 35 points in 5th in the Constructors, so 18 points ahead of McLaren now, who they were locked in a fierce fight with last year in the Constructors' Championship. They were more likely hoping they would be fighting in the top 3. That hasn't panned out, but Esteban Ocon confident with Laurent Rossi and Otmar Zafnau's and Alpine's 100-race plan to get them to the front of the grid. There's still some way to go on that front. 42 minutes and 18 seconds left of free practice 1. Max Verstappen has the fastest lap time ahead of Sergio Perez. Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas is up in 3rd at the moment. We've got a mixture of tyres going on at the moment. Available this weekend that Pirelli have brought are the C1 hard, the C2 medium and the C3 soft. But during this free practice 1 and 2 session, Pirelli have asked the teams to run 2 sets of hard tyres that are revised Pirelli tyres that are going to be introduced at the British Grand Prix. And it's all about Pirelli trying to make the structure, in their words, more resistant to fatigue ahead of 2024. But they brought it forward because it's already getting to the limit in these first opening races in 2023. So that's the situation. They all went out on test tyres at the start. They're all gradually now coming into the pits and changing back on to, we've got medium and soft action out on track. Zhou Guanyu is making his way round in the Alfa Romeo, currently on it for a personal best in the middle sector, coming up into this turn 12, the right hander. Quite a technical final sector, really important when it comes to looking after the tyres. And I suppose, Mark, that's what they'll be really concentrating on in this session. It's about finding out how good your degradation is, your braking points, your throttle time, your energy deployment, all of that.
Yeah, because that circuit change really does change all of those things you just mentioned. Coming up with a new map for deploying and harvesting energy changes about where you want to deploy that extra 160 horsepower coming from the hybrid system. What are the best places to harvest it, and how much you need to retain for the end of the lap, for example. I thought we were going to get a message from Max Verstappen there, but he thought better of it. But the teams will be using this session, and particularly the one this afternoon, to learn all about those things. Tyres again, degradation like we talked about, with the higher energy for longer durations at the end of the lap than we've had previously. And interestingly, this change in circuit, I think, will also change the pit lane loss time. So because everyone's going much quicker through the final part of the lap, if you're in the pits during that period, you lose more time than you would have done previously when everyone's having to navigate that slow chicane. So that again plays into your strategy decisions.
That was the voice of the former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. We're also joined by the BBC's chief F1 reporter, Andrew Benson. And you would have also just heard, while we were speaking, the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. It also looked like there was a little bit of bouncing going on in that final corner, but equally we could hear that he had to lift as well coming out of that final corner. The new long right-hander of turn 14, which brings you out onto the main straight. They've gotten rid of the slow chicane that we've become so accustomed to. It's a bit of a reworking of this layout that was last used back in 2006, so quite a while ago. And I think one of the only drivers on the grid to use that was probably Fernando Alonso, so he's the only one that's got experience of it.
Yeah, true. 13 years ago last time he won a race, Fernando Alonso. Can you believe that?
And it was here, wasn't it? At the Spanish Grand Prix in
Unbelievable.
It was 2013, so it would have been a decade ago.
Sorry, a decade ago. Yeah, you're right. That's what I meant to say, not 13.
Well, his second place in Monaco was his best result since 2014 in Hungary, which felt a bit bizarre because he's been on such great form this year, but it's been consistently third places with the fourth place, but then suddenly he gets a second place in Monaco, and it's hard to believe that, and that stat that has been proved correct, to take part in a third of all Formula One races ever. The man just continues to deliver as well. When I wonder, and the sound you're listening to is Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. He makes his way around the right-hander of turn 14. Bit of traffic on the back straight, as then hits into the braking zone of turn 10 to get his first proper lap time on the board. I wonder, though, when will questions start to be asked about Fernando Alonso's teammate, Lance Stroll? We all know Lance Stroll is the son of Lawrence Stroll, who owns the team. And we know Lance came into this season a bit up against it, broken wrists, and it was amazing what he achieved in Bahrain, fighting hard and getting some good points on the board with a P6 finish. But at least, as Andrew said earlier, when he was teammates with Esteban Ocon, Fernando Alonso, Ocon would start behind but get closer and closer as the weekend progressed. We're not quite seeing that with Stroll at the moment. Well,
I think these questions, to be fair, have been asked for quite some time. But when you think about Aston Martin and when they employed Sebastian Vettel, who was a world champion, the questions came then. Was Lance Stroll going to be shown up against the world champion that is Vettel? And I don't think he necessarily was, to the extent we thought he might be.
Cars bouncing on the braking into 10 and in the last corner.
More bouncing.
Understood, thank you.
For Max Verstappen as he came into turn 10 though this time, and really wrestling that steering wheel in his Red Bull.
There you go, that's clearly a problem they need to sort out, isn't it, over the course of the sessions. But going back to Lance Stroll, I think he actually acquitted himself pretty well over the long term against Sebastian Vettel. I don't know what the actual stats say, but it feels like he was close enough to justify his position in the team. He even had some really strong results on occasions. But actually what we're seeing now with Fernando Alonso is perhaps that Sebastian wasn't the Sebastian of old during the last couple of years of his reign in Formula One, and perhaps with Fernando Alonso we're seeing a new level of driver. As Andrew just mentioned, he's consistent, he's a very, very strong, class-leading driver, up there with the very best of them. Certainly in my experience, having worked with him and Lewis Hamilton were the two greatest drivers I've ever had the pleasure to work with, and that still seems to be bearing true for both of those guys, I think, in the cars right now. And that means that Lance Stroll has a new benchmark to be measured against. Outright performance, he's not stepping up to the plate and being on a par with Fernando, but even the mistakes that are creeping in, and we saw a hideous race for him in Monaco, which he'll desperately be keen to get rid of in his mind. Even then, with the mistakes that are creeping in, those are what people are going to remember. Those are the things that stand out.
Just had a quick look at last year's results between the two Aston Martin drivers, Vettel and Lance Stroll. And just on race results, Stroll managed to get the better of Vettel 10 times, but of course that doesn't really tell the full story, but it just gives you a little inkling. There was talk, as you say, of Vettel not being at his best. There absolutely isn't that talk when it comes to Fernando Alonso.
So look, my point of view on this is that Vettel was never as good as Fernando Alonso, and that's the end of it. Now, if you compare the stats between Vettel and Stroll and Alonso and Stroll in qualifying, so in 2021, the average gap for Vettel ahead of Stroll was 0.13 of a second. 2022, the average gap Vettel ahead of Stroll was 0.04, or I think it was 13.7 to Vettel in terms of qualifying. This year it's 7-0 to Alonso, and he's more than 3/10 quicker. So whichever year of Vettel you take against Stroll, Alonso is like something like 3 times, or quite a lot more than 3 times faster in terms of the margin. And Vettel achieved an awful lot in his career statistically, and his statistics are greater than Fernando Alonso's, but I don't believe that he was as good a driver as Fernando Alonso ever, and he may well have dropped off in the last 2 years as well. That's a controversial point of view. There's lots of fans out there who don't agree with me, but there's a lot of people in the Formula 1 paddock, I can tell you, who really do.
Bold claims from Benson. Hashtag BBC F1 if you agree or disagree. We'll have a look at them as we are getting quite a few cars coming into the pits. The sound you're hearing is Lewis Hamilton in his Mercedes coming into turn 10, or out of the exit of turn 10. And turn 7 and 8 that was earlier on in the lap, which brings you up to the blind right hand of turn 9. Just running out a little bit wide through 8 as the track starts to head uphill and loses the rear end slightly, corrects it and gets back going again. So 34 minutes and 19, 18, 17 seconds of free practice 1 for this Spanish Grand Prix weekend remain. Max Verstappen currently has the fastest lap time at 1:15.9, so we're already getting down quite quickly. Pierre Gasly is second in the Alpine, about 4/10 back. Then it's Sergio Perez in third, Fernando Alonso and Carlos Sainz, the top 5. Sargent, Ocon, Tsunoda, Leclerc, Hulkenberg, the top 10. Bottas, Norris, Zhou Guanyu, Albon, Nick de Vries, the top 15. Piastri, Hamilton, Magnussen, Russell and Stroll currently 20th and last, but it is just practice. We've had some tyre testing going on as well. Pirelli running a revised hard compound tyre to be introduced by the British Grand Prix weekend, so teams having to run that at the start of this session or throughout the session, with some cars still on that tyre. The sound you're listening to is Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, who's just come across the line and has now eased right off as he heads into turn 1.
Just to complete that point about Aston Martin, the thing of course we need to bear in mind is that Lance Stroll is Lawrence Stroll's son. He's not about to lose his drive through a lack of performance, no matter how much faster than Fernando Alonso is. He's a really good driver, Lance Stroll, but when they were thinking about signing Alonso, and this happened in quite a short space of time because there was like a couple of days when Vettel announced his retirement and they went after Alonso and signed him, Martin Whitmarsh and other senior people at Aston Martin, but particularly Martin Whitmarsh, who's the chief executive officer, who obviously worked with Alonso twice, well actually no, once in McLaren in 2007, and then he basically helped him come back to McLaren for 2015, even though Whitmarsh then got fired by Ron Dennis before Alonso turned up. He took Stroll aside and said, look, are you ready for this? You know, I think we should sign Alonso, but you need to know that everything you've heard about him is true. He's high maintenance, he's extremely demanding, but he's also brilliant. And Lance is going to have a challenge in the other car, the like of which he's never had before. And you need to be ready for that, and he needs to be ready for that. Are you ready for it? And Lawrence Stroll, to his credit, said yes. And I'm told that his view is, well, obviously he wants he wants his son to be world champion, but he doesn't mind so much if he's being beaten by someone of the caliber and reputation of Alonso. He wouldn't want a Hulkenberg, for example, to come in and destroy Stroll, which incidentally Hulkenberg didn't destroy Stroll when he did some subbing for that team. But if it's going to be someone like Alonso, then it's kind of okay for him. And, you know, you've got to give him credit for that. But
what about the sort of longer-term aspirations? This is a team that's just moved in just this week into their brand new factory at enormous expense, massive investment. That's a long-term investment in the team. The results are starting to come. They've brought in Fernando Alonso, one of the greatest drivers this sport has ever seen. They clearly want to be a major player in this sport. Can they do that with a second driver of the calibre of Lance Stroll?
Well, it's a really good question, Mark, and I think here's Norris's radio.
Focusing and bottoming into the last corner. because I'm setting the car quite a bit.
The dreaded P word. It's come back.
It sounds like everyone's got porpoising, stroke bottoming, stroke bouncing, doesn't it, into that last corner? They're all going to have a think about that, I'm sure.
That was Lando Norris, by the way, the McLaren, just coming through the final corner. But pick up, Andrew.
I think the answer, Mark, is not with Lance Stroll. But if they're going to have an A-lister in the other car, then they might not win the Constructors' Championship. But if they get to a position where they have a completely competitive car, an absolutely competitive car, which they haven't quite got this year, although they've made such huge progress, then there's no reason why they can't with that driver. But obviously, if Stroll's going to stay at this performance differential to a driver of an Alonso stroke Hamilton stroke Verstappen type caliber, it is going to be a weakness as a team, sure.
There's going to be some tough questions, aren't there, but coming Lawrence Stroll's way, I'm sure, over the next few years.
Well, I think it's all well and good, Lawrence Stroll not questioning it, but the fact that Aston Martin are only a point ahead of Mercedes in the constructors' standings right now, where they really should be a lot, that gap should be a lot bigger. I suppose it won't be a Lawrence Stroll because he will never question it, but it will be, when did the board start to outnumber, and those on the exec committee start to go, well, hang on a minute here, could we get somebody who couldn't, if Alonso's finishing second, we can then have the teammate, the person who's in Stroll's seat, in third.
Well, they might, but it's Lawrence Stroll's toy box, so he gets to decide.
That's always the caveat. 29 minutes, 37, 36, 35 seconds on the clock remain of free practice 1, and Sergio Perez has just gone fastest on the Redwall soft tyre with a 1:15.3, but his teammate is the sound you're hearing right now. The Dutchman Max Verstappen returns to the scene, where of course he got his first career win in Formula 1 here at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, through the blind right-hander of turn 9, down the main straight into the braking zone, down through the gears. He's over 6.5 tenths up already, is Max Verstappen, now into the technical final sector, turn 12, easy on the throttle, then foot to the floor. Now, can he keep it flat? Shall we have a listen? No, he can't. No. Little lift there, wasn't there, through the new turn 14 that takes him back round onto the start-finish straight, crosses the line. He does find time, though, over 7.5 tenths the gap between Verstappen and Perez. Fastest lap time, a 1:14.6.
So, do you know, that is going to be a really interesting talking point, and probably the biggest challenge the teams have now, this bouncing, this thing that's upsetting the cars into this very fast final corner, the right-hander of turn 14. This is the one where a huge chunk of your lap time is going to be won or lost, because if you have to lift off, that bouncing or that porpoising, that sort of aerodynamic effect that keeps pulling the car down onto the floor and then popping it back up again, is completely unsettling for a driver. And it does mean that you can't lean on the car, which is what you need to do. You can't keep that throttle buried underneath your right foot, which you also need to do, because that leads on to an incredibly long straight going past the pits and down on towards turn 1, where they're reaching speeds of excess of 200 miles an hour if they get that final corner right. If they get it wrong, however, all of that is compromised all the way down. So there's going to be a lot of discussion in the debriefs after this session, tweaks to things like ride heights, to roll bars, and to spring settings, to the setup of the car, anything they can to try and overcome this effect of bouncing that's going to be upsetting the car so much.
And you can also just see, though, with the addition of that chicane, with the taking away the chicane and the new final corner, we've just seen a stat that's Leclerc, the FP1 fastest time from last year, a 1:19.8, and at the moment a 1:14.6 is the fastest lap time. So that is evidence right there of how much the lap time has shortened around here. But of course, with that comes tyre issues and all sorts of factors that the teams will be gathering crucial data for as we tick down with just under half an hour remaining of free practice 1. The two Hasses are out on track at the moment off the back of a not so great weekend in Monaco. Kevin Magnussen was registered as finishing, but came in early doors after being left out on the slick tyres in the rain for as long as possible just to see what Haas could do. Nico Hülkenberg coming home in 17th at the moment on the soft tyres. Magnussen is third fastest, a 1:16.3, and Nico Hülkenberg is just about to cross the line now for the German, and it is at 6th place. Hülkenberg actually has a really not a great record around Spain. It's one of his less strong tracks. Never reached Q3 and only finished higher than 10th once back in 2017 for Renault, where he finished 6th. So Hülkenberg not too much of a fan of this Barcelona track, but he's 6th fastest at the moment.
Yeah, they all know it so well that, you know, there's not many unknowns other than that final section that we know we've got this year. But in terms of the rest of the lap, they know exactly what should happen. I'm sure they've all driven good cars and they've all driven bad cars, so they know the differences. They know what they hope to expect going into each of these corners. And, you know, that means that if you haven't got that, you are immediately disappointed. You're immediately, you know you're not quite on the pace. It's not like going to a new circuit where you're feeling your way around and you're not quite sure if this is what it should be like or not until you've really done a handful of laps. So they know straight out the box what they should have. If they haven't got it, then they know there's work to be done immediately.
Putting in the work at the moment is Esteban Ocon. That's the sound you're listening to in the Alpine, making his way round turn 12. Has to have another go at the steering to get it turned into the right-hander. Now down the final corner. Does he go flat?
No.
Can't do it. Even gets a little twitch on the steering wheel as well for good measure. Comes across the line. That Ocon is on the medium compound tyre at the moment, just making his way around, so it doesn't improve on his lap time, and the Haas gets out of the way as he heads into the braking zone of turn 1.
Do you know, I think this is good. You know, the fact that it's not a clear cut by the look of it, it's not clear cut. You know, they've got problems through this final corner. That's kind of good for us because it means they have got work to do. As Andrew said earlier, if it was easy flat, everybody would be doing it. There'd be no differentiation between the good cars and the not so good cars. But drivers are on the absolute limit here, which means you promote mistakes. The guys who get it right and make the fewest mistakes will come out on top. And actually, when we start to look ahead to strategy for Sunday, which is what the teams will be doing over the course of all of Friday, all of today, if we can get a situation where it's on the cusp of being either a 2-stop, maybe even a 3-stop, if tyre degradation is higher than we've had previously because of that high-energy final corner, then that could mean that we get split strategies on race day, and that could then spice up the race. It's one of those circuits that hasn't always produced the best type of racing. It has had some epic ones over the years, but strategy has typically been a 2-stopper with a 2 sort of softer end of the tyre range being used. If we can get on the cusp of being a 2 or even maybe a 3, that just opens up a number of strategic options, which as I say, could spice up Sunday for us.
Absolutely. This is the sound of Esteban Ocon coming through the final corner just a few moments ago, and that is where he just got a little bit of a twitch on the steering wheel. Just had to get out of the throttle ever so slightly in that Alpine as it bumps its way across the runoff and into the final corner. Hashtag BBC F1. People are absolutely loving the Martin Whitmarsh-Stroll story, Andrew. But Bethany makes a good point. Surely when it comes to Stroll, it's not how he compares to Alonso, but how he compares to the likes of Sergio Perez or other second drivers, because Alonso isn't going to go great with another number 1 alongside him, but he needs a solid second. So that's where you see the examples of Sergio Perez, albeit, you know, maybe Monaco aside. You have Perez in that Red Bull, who is doing a brilliant job by Red Bull standard, because more often than not he is there. He might be able to take the win when Verstappen is unable to, but when Verstappen can take it, Perez is there to back the points.
I think that's exactly the point. He's almost, he'd hate me saying this of course, but he's almost the perfect number 2 driver, isn't he, for exactly those reasons, whereas Lance Stroll at the moment isn't there picking up the next place behind Alonso. He's typically some way back, and you read out the stat about points in the team's championship earlier. I think the team will eventually look at that, and as they do at every point over the season, they're always reflecting and looking back and analysing. They will start to see this pattern forming that in terms of the Constructors' Championship, they're not where they could be given the potential of the car.
Let's talk about Sergio Perez. Second at the moment in both the timings for FP1, just over 7.5 tenths back from his teammate, but second in the drivers' standings. Now the gap is 39 points to his teammate. Rather worryingly, it's only 12 points to Fernando Alonso in third. Does Perez come into this weekend with a lot of pressure suddenly because of what, well, let's be honest, disaster weekend for him? Can't afford to do that again, surely.
He certainly won't want a weekend like last time out, but I think the pressure will only be really coming from himself. I mean, I'm going to put this out there. I don't think too many people genuinely see him as a title contender, and I know that it's been close.
It was nice while it lasted.
Well, but that's it. It was a little glimmer of hope that I think everybody was grasping onto. But I don't even mean that in any disrespect to Sergio Perez. I think Max Verstappen is just so good that I haven't seen anybody that's been a teammate of his that can come anywhere near matching him. He's had occasions, and we know how good he is on the street circuits, and on those days, on occasions, he's maximised that, and that's been great, and it has kept him in contention. And in his own mind, he will want to believe that, of course, he can win this championship. He has to believe that. That's what motivates every driver on the grid, that they're going to have the perfect outcome every time they get in the car. But I think that's the only place that pressure's coming from, because I don't think anyone in the team is necessarily expecting him to suddenly become a contender. They want him to do the job of the perfect number 2, and that's really, if he does that, of course, he is in with a chance, if Max slips up, of winning a Grand Prix again.
They don't want him, Red Bull, to challenge Max Verstappen.
No.
They just want him to sit behind him and not cause any trouble and bank as many points as possible. They don't want to have a team fight situation on their hands. That's not why they've employed him. They've employed him to be a good solid number 2, and that's what he is. As you said, Mark, he's a really good driver, but he's not absolute top drawer, is he? That's just the facts.
And let's not forget, he was looking at the end of his career not too long ago, Red Bull throwing him a lifeline. Often Red Bull are made out to be a bit of the villain, the way they have gone through their junior driver scheme. But certainly Sergio Perez probably owes them a little bit too for these last couple of years. Certainly getting some more wins under his belt than he would have done. Lewis Hamilton, just a few moments ago, was making his way through the medium speed chicane that is turn 1 and 2, and that Mercedes looking rather shaky.
All over the place, still on the experimental hard tyres, of course, as opposed to some of the other runners that have now switched to the soft tyre. But all over the place, lots of twitching going on, very unstable through the high-speed stuff. They've got work to do. I mean, this is, you take a big caveat with those tyres. We don't know exactly what their performance difference might be to a regular hard tyre, and even if you do that, it's still the hard tyre, which is going to be the least preferred one of this weekend.
That was the voice of the former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. We've also got the BBC's Chiefs F1 writer, Andrew Benson, guiding you through all the action for this weekend's Spanish Grand Prix. It's currently free practice 1, the opening hour of track time to kickstart the weekend at 19 minutes and 6.54 seconds on the clock, and it's Max Verstappen who currently has the fastest lap time on a 1:14.6. He's out on track at the moment, coming up to turn 4, and Sergio Perez is second. Zhou Guanyu has popped up into third in his Alfa Romeo, ahead of Valtteri Bottas, his teammate, in fourth. Then it's Magnussen, the top 5, Gasly, Hülkenberg, Sargent, Ocon, Alonso, the top 10, De Vries, Albon, Sainz, Leclerc and Tsunoda, the top 15, Norris, Piastri, Hamilton, Russell, who have stayed on the test tyres that Pirelli are asking the teams to run in these practice sessions, and they're down in 18th and 19th, only in front of Lance Stroll. There was a lot of work actually being done to the front end of that Aston Martin earlier on, and so clearly the Aston Martin mechanics making a few tweaks to perhaps the setup on Stroll's Aston Martin. But Sergio Perez also back in the garage too, with work being done to the front end of his Red Bull.
Yeah, big difference between the two Red Bulls. 7/10 of a lap, 7/10 of a second rather, in terms of lap time, as we see a replay of Max Verstappen heading into turn 1 with a car exiting the pits. He finds his way, big twitch. Even as he's backed off the throttle, I think, big twitch into turn 1. But big difference between Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen, a stat that we've just seen flash up on our screens here, is heading into turn 1, which is that very, very fast corner, or big braking zone rather, into the turn 1 after the start-finish straight. Max Verstappen braking 9 metres later than his teammate. That's a big chunk. 9 metres may not sound like it's kind of 2 car lengths, but that's a big chunk of space on the racetrack going at that speed, in which he's managing to stay off the brake pedal for. So a huge chunk of lap time, of course, comes with that, and that must be that Sergio less confident on the brakes, a little bit more unstable perhaps, and so that gives him something to work on that he might be able to gain a bit of time from. As
Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari just went a little bit wide, actually, coming out of turn, I think that was turn 4, and kicked up a bit of gravel as he made his way across. This is the sound, that was Leclerc, I think, actually. This is the sound of Sainz coming down now into turn 1, down through the gears, into the right-hander. Both Ferraris out on the track, currently down in 14th and 15th on the soft tyre.
Talking of Ferrari, a man called Albert Fabregat, who's a Spanish technical journalist, really nice guy. He's posted a really interesting photo on Twitter. He says that the Ferraris are on different setups. He says Sainz has got the upgrade on him and Leclerc has not got the upgrade. And he's got the lap times. And it does look, just from glancing down that lap time list, so Sainz's first lap 18.8, Leclerc's first lap 19.0, Sainz's second lap 18.6, Leclerc 18.9, Sainz third lap 18.9, Leclerc goes faster on that lap, but then a couple of slow laps, Sainz 18.6, Leclerc 17.2, 17.5. It does look, well, it's not certain at this moment whether that upgrade's working for Ferrari or not. They'll obviously crunch the numbers afterwards.
And that's the last thing they'll be wanting to hear, isn't it? Ferrari hoping to introduce these raft of upgrades a few races ago in Imola, but of course that was cancelled due to the devastating flooding. But Carlos Sainz comes across the line now on the Red Bull soft tyre and puts in a 1:15.7, which takes him third fastest. And Charles Leclerc, his teammate, also out on track, is about to go for a quick lap. He's just finishing up his outlap at the moment. He's coming into the final sector now, this was the moment for Sainz earlier on where he just ran a little bit out wide and was actually coming into the final corner, so I got that completely wrong, and kicked up the bit of the gravel, ran a little bit wide, the front left and the rear left, skating across, but no harm done, and that was just before he started his fast lap as well, so it might have ruined a little bit of the momentum he had coming down the main straight. And
there is also now gravel all over the inside of that corner, so that's not going to help anybody that's slightly offline. But a decent showing, I guess, or better showing at least from Carlos Sainz, but still over a second behind the Red Bulls. I know it's very early days, it's still FP1, and there's all sorts of caveats that go with that. People trying and testing new things, learning things about their car, rather than just going for outright lap time, of course. But on a comparable tyre, both on the soft, it's Carlos Sainz that's over a second behind Sergio Perez, who is, of course, himself some way behind Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I think we need to take these times with a pinch of salt, Mark, probably. Yeah. I mean, you've got Lando Norris just there, what is he, 600ths, less than 600ths behind Sainz. I don't think the McLaren's only 600ths slower than the Ferrari, really. And you've got the two Alfa Romeos, Joe and Bottas, just behind Bottas, again, just a couple of tenths behind Sainz. So I think we can probably assume that Ferrari's running a bit heavier there. We still have to see this Ferrari upgrade. It's going to be, I think obviously the key for the Ferrari upgrade, it's not about one lap pace.
Yeah.
The car's actually been competitive on one lap, or very nearly competitive. It's the second fastest car, quite clearly, as Leclerc goes third fastest, just ahead of Sainz there with his lap on the soft tyre. And it's easily the second fastest car in the field over one lap. Their problem has been as soon as they do more than one lap.
Yeah.
So it's the race simulation runs this afternoon are going to be the first indication we get, and I'll crunch those numbers for you.
I'm sure you will.
As to how that Ferrari upgrade's working.
And of course it has to do that, it has to improve their drivability in the race without harming that single lap pace that has been so good all year, and that's often a sort of balancing act. Sometimes you trade one characteristic off for another, so that's what they'll be keeping a close eye on.
And as this is of course free practice one, as Andrew Benson said, we don't know fuel loads, and it's we've had the testing tyre out as well. Nick De Vries in the AlphaTauri has just put that car up into third fastest on the soft tyre, 9 tenths behind Max Verstappen, but only about a tenth behind Sergio Perez. So take it, as I said, with a pinch of salt. But Andrew, I mean, you mentioned McLaren there. A bit of news coming in for them on the technical management side. Rob Marshall has moved over as new technical director, or he will do, engineering and design from Red Bull, and will start in 2024, as you just hear Lance Stroll and the Aston Martin lose the rear end, but catch it again as he makes his way through turn 10. This is a big signing for McLaren, right? As they continue to bolster their technical department, they've reshuffled. James Key has moved on; he has departed. But for those who don't know, Rob Marshall had a pretty good run with Red Bull, especially during the Double World Championship years from 2011 onwards.
Indeed, yes. 4 consecutive Double World Championships there, drivers and constructors from 2010 to 2013. Yep. Rob Marshall was he was the mechanical design engineer who worked with Adrian Newey's sort of aerodynamics lead and overall lead through those years. And obviously felt it and did such a good job that Christian Horner, the team principal, even mentioned what a good job he'd done in the press release that said he was leaving the team earlier this week. He's not actually been on sort of frontline Formula One design duties for a few years now at Red Bull. He's been moving on to other projects, Horner said, but he's obviously got a lot of experience. He's very, very highly regarded throughout the Formula One paddock, and he'll be now the third technical director at McLaren starting next year, in a restructure that I think has raised a few eyebrows up and down the pit lane. It's very unusual to have 3 people called technical director, all responsible for different areas of the car. Peter Pedromu is going to be aerodynamics technical director. A guy called David Sanchez is moving across from Ferrari to be, I can't remember what it is now, performance technical director or something like that. And then you've got Rob Marshall on engineering. They all report into Andrea Stella, who is team principal in name and in reality, but seems to have carved out a role for himself, along with the agreement of Zak Brown, the CEO, of team principal come technical director. He insists, Stella, that this structure is going to work, and McLaren need it to, because they're obviously having a very difficult time at the moment. Their new wind tunnel, by the way, comes on stream very soon, which they've got great hopes for. They've been using what they say is an outdated wind tunnel at the old Toyota Formula One wind tunnel in Cologne recently, and they've got a new simulator coming on stream a bit later than that. So they're targeting 2025 as their sort of first step back to the sort of what they hope is the real McLaren. And the appointment of Rob Marshall is very much a statement signing, is part of that hoped for upgrade in their technical team.
I think he's a great addition, actually, to the team, and not only because I think he's a very clever, very sort of innovative guy on the engineering side anyway, and he's shown that through lots of the work he's done at Red Bull, but he also comes with a huge amount of knowledge from the class leading team over the last few years. And we're in a new formula now of Formula One, which Red Bull have absolutely nailed. Other teams are all now scrambling to take people from Red Bull, because not only because they're great people, but because of what they know, what they've seen and what they've been part of on the inside of that team. And that transfers, almost immediately as soon as they arrive over to their new employers. So that's the first thing. I think in terms of the structure that McLaren have set up, what's going to be really interesting, and it's always the case in any organisation that sort of splits senior roles and responsibilities, is how the ego part of that works. Is any one of those people feel they want to be in charge? Can they work under sort of shared responsibility? And that often is the key to a structure like this being a failure or success. No doubt that any one of those people are all very good at what they do. They've proven that over years. But can they all work together in this new structure that doesn't see one person, other than Stella, but one person on the engineering side or on the aero side, on the technical side, overseeing the whole thing and being responsible? That's traditionally how Formula One has operated for years, and there's nothing wrong with change. And absolutely, as the show gets bigger, the teams get bigger, perhaps change is needed, but it's going to be an interesting one to follow.
8.5 minutes left of free practice. You're listening to George Russell of the Mercedes, who's been spending the majority of the session on the Pirelli test tyre, but now he is coming towards the end of his first lap time on the soft rubber round the final corner. Here's Verstappen.
Yeah, this mode is terrible. Just clipping everywhere at the beginning of the lap.
So Verstappen not too happy with the mode that he's in, as Russell comes across the line, and what's his first lap time on the soft tyre? It's 8th fastest for George Russell, 1.1 seconds off Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton, his teammate, is still in the pits at the moment, so we haven't seen what he's got on the soft rubber just yet.
Just to quickly explain what Max was talking about there, he's talking about the mode being terrible because it was clipping everywhere. That's what he said. Well, we talked earlier on about the new circuit layout, meaning teams have to now factor in or figure out the new strategy for harvesting and deploying energy with their hybrid system. Clipping is where the car gets towards the end of the straight and it switches into that harvesting mode when really Max still wants it to be on power. So it's sort of running out of performance, if you like, running out of power and switching to harvesting. So easily fixable, of course. You change these things with either steering wheel switches, or the team can come up with a completely new map and upload that back into the car when he gets back to the garage. So certainly not anything to worry about for the weekend, just part of the process they have to go through on a new track layout like this.
Work being done on the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, which is currently being tended to in the garage, as his teammate Carlos Sainz is currently in 7th, just behind his teammates. 6th and 7th, both Ferraris, but both of them are currently in the pits. So a few tweaks being done to that. Zhou Guanyu, Bottas and Hamilton are also in at the pit lane. Everybody else is out on track. Norris is heading out now in his McLaren, back on the test rubber, as is his teammate Piastri and Hulkenberg. Everybody else is either on the soft, or if you're Sergio Perez or Alex Albon, you're on the medium. Here's Ocon, currently 3rd.
Clouds threatening or no?
Nothing on the radar at the moment coming at us. There's weather fronts around, but nothing coming for us at the moment.
Nothing on the radar, but they're looking a little bit ominous. At the start of this session, it was 30% chance of rain, and it has been raining on and off all week in Barcelona. It's expected there is a chance on Saturday and Sunday, just as much as there was a chance in Monaco on Sunday, and everyone dismissed it. Jolyon Palmer here last week completely dismissed it, and what happened? The heavens opened and chaos ensued. So we might well have a little bit of wet weather to play with, which is only going to help around this track, I think, when it comes to the racing excitement that we all want to see.
Oh yeah, I mean, the unpredictability of weather is one thing that no engineer can control. You know, the Formula One engineers want to control everything, to engineer it to be under their control, and when that happens, of course, you tend to get very predictable outcomes. Rain, of course, mixes all of that up, and then it's thinking on the fly. It's making decisions like we saw last week, that just within a split second either way can be right or wrong and can completely change the race. So yeah, I would not, a bit of rain would not be unwelcome, I'm sure, from our point of view.
Fernando Alonso, spoken a lot about him so far. He has just put his Aston Martin up into 8th spot. And what tyre is he on, Alonso? I can't quite tell. Is it the soft rubber? It looks like it might be the soft. It's red wool, but it is. Yeah. So it is, because the timing graphic there didn't quite register what tyre he was on. But he's good enough for 8th at the moment, a 1:15.7 last lap around. So everybody out of the pits then for this last 4.5 minutes, bar Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo, who is still in that garage. Verstappen fastest, Perez, Ocon, De Vries and Gasly at the top 5. And Alonso just seeing the reverberations on the rear of that Aston Martin as it runs out slightly wide, coming through the fast right-hander of turn 9, which brings you onto the back straight. DRS flap swings open. But as the clouds are starting to look ever darker and ever more ominous in Barcelona, with just 4 minutes on the clock, it's also looking rather ominous for Red Bull. Could they, Mark Priestley, former mechanic for McLaren, win every single race this year? Yeah,
they could. And it's it's one of these things that people have been throwing around at the start of the season as a unbelievable potential stat. But why not? I can't see anybody at the moment that's got the performance, at least, to challenge them. The caveats to that are, Monaco, I think, would have been perhaps the obvious one where someone else would have had a better chance, but still Max Verstappen dominated. The only thing that might really bring other teams closer is that Red Bull, of course, have certain restrictions in terms of their aerodynamic research and development because of winning the championship last year. They've got the cost cap restrictions in play. Other teams will have far more time in the wind tunnel to develop upgrades, and we're seeing some of those upgrades coming through now. Red Bull will gradually slow down, if they haven't already, stop bringing parts to the circuit, and potentially that should allow others to start to continue upgrading and bring that performance gap down. So let's keep our fingers crossed that can happen.
Charles Leclerc is the driver you're listening to in his Ferrari, up through the gears as he makes his way round the right-hander of turn 3. Really high lateral forces experienced here, tough on tyres as well. He's on the yellow-walled medium compound tyre, and just getting up to speed is Charles Leclerc. He is still in 7th, so he's on a bit of an outlap, really, I think. He's not going particularly fast. His teammate is also out of the pits as well on the soft tyre, though. So difference in strategies for the Ferrari team, as Andrew was saying earlier as well. Carlos running the new upgrades that they have got for this session, at least. Leclerc not so much, but this free practice 1 session, it's hard to really get a good grip on what the times are telling us. We've got Ocon in 3rd, which actually isn't too surprising after Monaco, but De Vries is up there in 4th, Magnussen 6th. So especially as the weekend goes on, the track continues to rubber in, and with just 2 minutes on the clock, we start to paint a little bit more of a picture of what we might expect, particularly with the drivers getting up to speed with this slightly tweaked layout here at the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya, with turn 14 now one long right-hander. We've removed the slow chicane that they all became quite accustomed to, and where perhaps we used to see cars running off if they made a mistake, that is now the track. But not everyone can go flat through there just yet, which is brilliant to see. And lots of the drivers actually experiencing bumping, and that dreaded word porpoising coming back into play, especially into that final corner. George Russell and Mercedes complaining about it, as was Max Verstappen. We've seen the Ferrari having a few bounces through there too. So it's not as straightforward as I think the teams and the drivers, who, as we've spoken about, Mark, have spent many a lap around here in the past testing, as they would have liked.
Yeah, it's actually been one of the busiest FP1 sessions we've seen for a while, for all of those reasons. That not only we got quite a lot of upgrades up and down the pit lane, one of the first opportunities to really test those on what you might call a normal circuit after all the street circuits we've been to in recent weeks, but also the change in layout. And it's big, it's not insignificant, it's a really substantial change which is going to affect so many different things, from the cars to strategy to lap times, everything we've already talked about, and that's what's been going on over the course of this session. So lots learnt, lots of numbers to crunch inside the garages in between FP1 and FP2, and only they really know what's really going on behind the scenes at this point.
The sound you're listening to is Lando Norris in the McLaren, still running that tribute livery that they debuted in Monaco to celebrate the Triple Crown, winning the Monaco Grand Prix, winning the 24-hour Le Mans, and winning the Indy 500. And Norris currently down in 11th, and he is on the test tyre. He's brought that back out for a final runner as he just gets one lap in time as the clock now counts down. Checkered flag out, that is the end of FP1, but still some final laps to run. Alonso will finish with a 1:15.5 for him. This is the sound of Pierre Gasly going down the inside of a Williams, and it's Logan Sargent into turn 10.
Me and Gasly touched.
And that looked a little bit too close for comfort. There certainly was contact between Gasly's front right and Logan Sargent's rear left. Sargent, I think, saw it at the very last minute and then dived out of it and managed to run a little bit wide, because that turn 10 had slightly reworked a couple of years ago to make way for the MotoGP that goes around here. So you've got a little bit more room to kind of let the car run out.
Yeah, that's right. They both just about got away with it, but it's not something we see in practice very often, is it? Cars making contact with each other, but I think they've both survived.
They will live to tell the tale for free practice 2, which will come up a little bit later at 4 o'clock here online and across BBC Sport website, and at the Grand Prix live on BBC Radio 5 Live on Sunday. But Max Verstappen then fastest at the end of free practice 1, a 1:14.6, 7.5 tenths ahead of Sergio Perez, his teammate, in second. Esteban Ocon third, then it's Nick de Vries. Pierre Gasly the top 5, Alonso, Magnussen, Leclerc, Sainz and Russell the top 10, Norris, Hamilton, Zhou, Tsunoda, Stroll the top 15, Bottas, Piastri, Hülkenberg, Sargent and Alex Albon, the last of the runners, in 20th spot. But Mark, as we said, it is only free practice 1. The first chance, though, we've been running new rubber. We've been seeing upgrades in full swing for the first time, really, since they were introduced in Monaco for some, the likes of Mercedes carrying that through. What are your main takeaways from FP1?
Main takeaways are that Red Bull's still dominating, although we take the lap times with a pinch of salt, but straight out of the box, Max Verstappen way ahead of the rest of the field, so take that to mean what you will. Probably exactly what you think it does, that he's got the quickest car and he's in the best position. But yeah, lots of learning up and down the field, and I'm really interested to see what happens in FP2 when everybody goes back into the garage, spends a couple of hours working through their cars, debriefing with the drivers, making changes, and then we'll come out again. Big problem coming into the final corner with that bounce. If you can sort that one out, you immediately gain a huge chunk of lap time.
Well, not long to go until we get the second practice session underway, but that brings out the checkered flag for the opening track action for Formula One here, as it gets ready for the 7th race of the season. Practice starts being done. The two Ferraris line up on the front row. I imagine that's where they'll be hoping to start from, really, but Red Bull might have something to say. Indeed, the stat isn't great. 29 of the 32 races here have been won from the front row, which just goes to show how difficult it is to overtake around here. But we're bringing the new for 2023 reworked C1 hard tyre, which could make the strategy with pit stops slightly better than last year.
Yeah, and that reworking of the circuit itself, the change has been made to try and improve overtaking, to try and make sure people come out the final corner with enough speed and not too much of a differentiation between braking and accelerating going onto the final straight, which then should mean into turn one, the opportunities there for more drivers to make the overtake.
Well, as the cloud comes over the hills here in Barcelona, there is certainly rain in the air. It was only 30% at the start of this session. That is rapidly rising as we make our way through the weekend. But at the end of free practice one, Verstappen fastest ahead of Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon. We've had some Pirelli testing tyres going out there as well. They will be in action again for free practice 2 as well for the teams to use. And Nick de Vries certainly looking strong for AlphaTauri, but again, I feel like we always have to caveat this thing, Mark, with careful, it's only for the FP1, but improvements from him certainly off the back of Monaco.
Well, we take the lap times with a pinch of salt, but you know, going out the box and having a car that feels good as a driver is a really great basis to work from. Everybody's going to make changes and the order will start to shuffle around a bit in FP2, but when you get a good feeling out the box, I mean, there's no better place to start your weekend. It's when you get a terrible feeling, the car's all over the place, that's when you start to struggle.
Well, we'll see what FP2 brings us. Gets underway just before 4 o'clock on the BBC Sport website and app. Thank you very much to Mark Priestley, the former mechanic at McLaren, Andrew Benson, the chief F1 reporter for the BBC. I've been Harry Benjamin. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. We shall see you for free practice 2.